Hi, welcome back to Not So Obvious Watches. I'm Pete McConville. Welcome also to my watch critique of the Seiko Prospex Sumo Anthracite SBDC097. I say critique, not review. I make no attempt. I don't see a great deal of value in trying to assess each and every watch against the same objective and arbitrary criteria. I try and assess each watch against what that watch is trying to achieve, and then to take that and use that as the criteria for these critiques. If you're interested in how the Seiko Sumo does, see me on the other side of the intro and we'll get into it. As always, I start these critiques with a bare bones description, just so we're all on the same page and we know we're talking about the same watch. This is the Seiko Prospex Anthracite Sumo Sapphire. I call it the Grey Ghost. They call it the SBDC097. Much prefer my name. It is a dive watch. It's going to cost you around about $800 from a place like Noman. So it sits in this odd place, high entry level, low mid-range kind of collecting zone. It was introduced in 2020 and I believe it remains in catalogue. The next phase of all of my critiques is what I call the interpretation, and this is where we try and unpick what is it that the brand is trying to achieve with this watch and use that as the criteria for how we assess the watch later on. I've begun thinking of this in 4 dimensions. Story, that is the strength of and its consistency of this watch with a brand and model history. Design, how well does the watch look and wear? Performance, what can it do? And then finesse, how close can you get to the watch and have the details hang in there? What are the little extras that come with the design? So in that vein, if you go look at what Seiko's trying to achieve with Prospex divers generally, some things you'll note. Nothing about Prospex says luxury, exclusivity, success, status marking, any of that sort of stuff. If you look at their website and read their stories and look at their catalogs, you can see that they're all about 2 things. They're about staying true to the Seiko story and their whatever watch line that fits in. And secondly, about the design, about the look. This is a company that offers something like 18 different body shapes, finishing styles, ideas of what a dive watch can even be. Compare that to someone like Rolex with their one. This is a company which is clearly about story and design. Those are absolutely what they're trying to achieve. If you look, sort of read the back, sort of read into what they're saying, they've really deprioritized performance and finesse. Okay, so having done our interpretation, we now roll into analysis, looking at the watch against those criteria. And I'm going to start with the strong suits that Seiko's really aiming for here and kick it off with story. How much does this watch play inside the brand and model history of Seiko and the Sumo? I would say it is well inside that established Seiko playbook. The specs, 200 meters diver, fully ISO certified, etc., are all typical Seiko. The overall look and feel, the choice of dial, the choice of indice, the choice of hands, even the overall ideas about how to sculpt the case, all very, very Seiko. You look at this watch and you instantly know where it's come from. Getting a bit closer and staying inside the Sumo line. Again, I think this watch stays very close to its Sumo history. It continues to give us a large, muscular, but still kind of athletic look that has been a Seiko Sumo trademark since there's been a Seiko Sumo. And just as the hands, indices, dial, etc. are all inside that kind of general Seiko diver look, if you get more detailed and look at these in more, even closer, you'll see that these are all typically Sumo styled. They're clearly more grown up. They feel more refined than the previous version. Certainly less playful that when we get to the bezel text than the previous Sumo. But I believe still clearly of a family, still clearly of that lineage. And as a result of all of that, this is a watch that stays well inside the Seiko Sumo kind of ideal, and they've really stuck to the story of what this watch is supposed to be. Okay, so let's move into the design. The next big strong suit of Seiko here, thinking about both its look and its wearability. Start with the case, which is large, 45 millimeters, and that is a defining characteristic of this watch and Sumos generally. All the better for underwater legibility too, I suppose. That case starts as, I'd just say, a large truncated ovoid, which is then sliced and diced and sculptured really aggressively. Long polished curved surfaces separated by thin strips of brushed steel, in quite aggressive sculpting on the inside of the lugs, and then all combining with sides of the case, a mid case that rises up, creating a partial shroud around the edges of the bezel, which are then cut away at the tops and bottoms to allow access. All of this creates lots of multiple surfaces, lots of mixed finishing that gives the watch overall a twisting, dynamic look and really bring home a lot of visual interest to the case. The bezel, by contrast, is a simple coin edge with a matte aluminium insert, anthracite in color with big, bold numbers. These numbers are plainer than the original or earlier versions of Sumo, but probably easier to read and certainly easier to digest. Moving inwards from the bezel to the dial, this comes in a anthracite that matches the bezel perfectly and has a very faint sunburst effect. The branding is really subtle, it's only printed, and it comes with the round markers commonly used by Seiko on their rounder, more curvaceous cases, except at the cardinal points of the 12, 6 and 9, which are trapezoids, and obviously there's a date at the 3 o'clock. There's a simple sword handset, very common with Seikos and with the Sumo in general. The hour is pretty short and stubby. The minute maintains that same heft, but is far longer, reaching all the way out to the chapter ring. This model comes with an orange second hand to play off that anthracite dial and bezel. Comes on a bracelet, which unfortunately I can't really talk about. I got rid of the bracelet off this watch before I'd even bought it in some ways, well before I'd got down to do a review of it. So I can't speak of the bracelet. I understand it's okay. It's a standard Seiko bracelet. If you want more details on that, you're really going to have to find another reviewer. Good news, there are thousands of people who talk about bracelets. Finally, the loom. Seiko always makes the loom a center point of their design. It's something of a point of pride for them, and that remains true for this watch. Loomy bright all over the place, and like all Seiko divers, it is super solid and shines brightly and long. Okay, so we're going to finish up the design thinking about the wearability of the watch, and the typical Seiko sorcery is at play here. If we think about fit, this watch is 52 millimeters lug to lug. It should be unwieldy. It should be difficult for a lot of people to wear. But combine that very large lug to lug distance with some very clever case angling, low slung lugs, attachment points right at the extreme ends of those lugs, lots of articulation possible, and this watch will fit wrists it shouldn't. And what I would emphasize is you really should try this watch before you dismiss it on the basis of that lug to lug. If we get down to feel, this is a mixture of thickness, case design, case back design, balance, lugs, etc. And the Seiko, just as it does for fit, uses all the tricks of the trade. Heavy sculpting of the case back, heavy sculpting of the mid case, really low slung lugs, really long attachment points, all of that. Oh, and by the way, it's only 13.5 millimeters thick, well balanced all round. Create a really firm, pleasant, planted feel on the wrist. You can wear this watch all day, every day, and be completely comfortable. Finally, there's presence. And at 45 millimeters with an awful lot of polishing, this is a watch that commands enormous visual presence. If you want that, this is a watch for you. Okay, so Seiko doesn't really emphasize the performance or the finesse of this watch, so I won't spend a lot of time talking about it. For the spec hunters out there, we'll get into the performance first. Okay, there's steel where you expect to see steel, sapphire where you expect to see sapphire, 200 meters water resistant, screw down crown, ISO rated watch. Everything's just meeting that minimum requirement. The movement is best described as solid. The 6R35 hacks and hand winds. I have found it to be generally reliable. Comes with a date, comes with a 70-hour power reserve, which is fine. There seems to have been some improvements to anti-shock, anti-magnetism. That's okay. But at 3 Hertz with plus 25 minus 15 accuracy, this is a movement a long way from the class average, and that really does need to be noted and will come back to haunt us later. Finally, there's the finesse of the watch, and this is an area where Seiko has traditionally, or at least more recently, been copying something of a caning. My example is actually very straight. I can't pretend that's normal, but it is. All my printing is clean and crisp, not remarkably so, but okay. The mid polish all over is again nice and clean and smooth. The brushing is pretty fine and silky, but it's good. The transitions again from surface to surface are good, not great, but they're okay. My bezel is aligned. It does come with a slightly mushy feel and a tinny sound, but that seems to be kind of the Seiko standard. They don't even aim for the big clicky rifle bolt sound of a Rolex. They go for something completely different. The operation of the movement is fine. Again, not great, not terrible, not buttery smooth, not crunchy or sandy, somewhere in the middle. I'd describe it as buzzy. Okay, so getting towards the pointy end now. The Judgement. How successful is this watch? It's a mixed bag. I think the watch nails the things that Seiko was aiming at. In terms of story, this is a classic Seiko diver. It is equally and clearly a Sumo, so that's great. Tick number 1. Design. I think it looks great. It's not perfect, and it's definitely not for everyone, but Seiko produces 16 or 17 or 18 different types of diver, so there will be a watch for everyone in there somewhere. And I think this is a watch that's really successful at what it's trying to do. High presence, still wearable, muscular, but also bulky in a way. I think all of that works really well. And finally, the finish choices and execution, the colorways, all brilliantly pull off the sense of style and fun that I think Seiko were aiming for with this design. That said, I'd be lying if I thought that the design was perfect. I think despite all the work and the angulation in profile, this case still looks a little bit too much like a wall of polished steel. I think that shroud around the bezel is fattening up the case and maybe could be cut down a little bit. I think the hour hand's a bit short and can get a bit lost in the dial. I don't think the indices are fully applied, rather they're stamped from the back and then filled, and that's fine. It does okay, but it doesn't really follow through on the sense of style that Seiko's creating here. Likewise, the printed logo, I'm not sure carries it all the way. I think perhaps the bezel is a little bland after the excitement of the previous version. I understand they wanted to tailor it and wind it back a little, but I think they went too far. And personally, I would love to see losing one line of text on the dial. I think I always prefer less text over more, and I think at the moment it's a little unbalanced with too much visual weight on the text at the bottom and not enough at the top. Okay, so that's all the really good stuff, the not quite so good stuff. Now let's get down to the traditional weak points, or the areas where Seiko hasn't even really tried. Start with Finesse. Now on my example, I actually think Seiko met their goal of being good enough. It's not great, but it's not bad. I can't find anything really wrong with the final finesse of my watch that would disqualify it. It's probably a fraction behind class average when you think about movement, action, and bezel, but not so far that you would kick this watch out of the competition. However, I do not think that is true when we start talking about performance. I don't believe the performance that this watch offers is enough in 2021. The routine adoption of 4 Hz plus or minus 5 seconds a day, rock solid, reliable Swiss movements across this area of the market has really made the 6-arm movements uncompetitive, too far off the pace. You might not care about water resistance, but again, in this space where other people are producing watches of the same size, of the same kind of caliber, with 300, 500 meters of water resistance, only coming in at 2, again indicates that the performance is kind of dropping away from the pack here a little bit. I think Seiko has not met their design goal here of having enough performance. As I said, I knew they were never trying to make this high point. They weren't trying to have this like be their point of competition. They just wanted to stay in touch with the pack, and I don't think they have. I think they've fallen off the back. So despite a killer design, I don't think this watch does enough to succeed in its class. Okay, so that's all the formal critique stuff done. Now I finish off with just my personal take. And despite giving this watch a failing grade, even against Seiko's own criteria, I own it, I love it, I've got no plans of taking it anywhere. But that has to be understood in my very specific context. First off, this Sumo fits within a wider collection. I collect Seiko Prospex divers. This particular colorway, this particular configuration in a Sumo fits beautifully into my collection, and as such, kind of it has to fulfill slightly different purposes just for me, and as a result, its shortfalls aren't such a big deal for me. If I think about my collection as a football team, the Sumo is a role player, not a match winner, and as long as it does its job, it's fine. And its job is A, to fill a slot, B, to be great fun and to be up for some summer rough and tumble and represent the Sumo. And it plays that line beautifully. And at only around $800 US, keeping the football analogy going, the price is good and there's no danger to my salary cap. So it keeps a slot on the roster. So to sum it up, the Grey Ghost works brilliantly for me and I love it. But at the same time, I'm not blind to the fact that it has some serious flaws and probably doesn't actually succeed against Seiko's own criteria for this watch, and is probably not competitive in class. So that was it. I failed this watch. I gave it a failing mark. Do you think I've been too harsh? Let me know in the comments. Do you think I let it off easy? Let me know in the comments. We'll have a chat. Anyway, I've been Pete McConville. This has been Not So Obvious Watches, and I'll see you later. Bye.